Hey H&K fans, James here with another video review for you. And this week I'm super excited because I've got a true unicorn here in the shop, and that's the HK G41. Now this came to me from a customer. I've done a lot of work for him in the past. He recently added this to his collection and wanted me to do an overhaul service on it. So while I had it here in the shop, I thought it's a great opportunity to do a video and share the knowledge on really kind of a rare weapon that most people don't know about. And even those HK fans who have some information on this, a lot of that information isn't as accurate as they might think. So regardless of how much you think you know about the G41 series, I guarantee we're going to learn more through the course of this video. So without further ado, why don't you grab yourself a tasty beverage and we'll dive right in. Okay, so to start out, we have to look at where H&K was as a company at the time, and what was going on in the world that was influencing H&K. And for that, we're looking around 1977, and specifically with NATO and their concentration to defend the free world against the communist aggression. And imagine the monumental task that NATO had before it, with all of these different countries that were part of that alliance, and all of the different weapons that they were using just from a small arms standpoint. Different weapons, different types of ammunition, and the logistical nightmare that it would have been if we had had to start World War III and support all of those different countries and their armies. So there was a study that was launched called STANAG, and STANAG was just an abbreviation for Standardization Agreement. And what they were after was to define a cartridge that all of these NATO armies would adopt and use. And initially that was decided that it would be a 5.56 cartridge. There was going to be some specifics within that, but they knew that from the start. And then there was a hope that they would also be able to select a specific weapon as well, and then the countries could all adopt that. We didn't quite come to that point, but the STANAG was really what drove the development of the G41. And you had all these other countries that were part of NATO that were trying to do the same thing. So H&K at the time, what they had in 5.56 was the HK33, which is just a scaled down version of the roller delayed blowback operated G3 battle rifle that the German army had adopted, as well as many other NATO countries. But that did not meet all of the criteria that STANAG study was putting out. So they were going to have to modify that original design from the HK33 into something new. And as we go through this, you're going to see there's obvious influences from the American M16. To put it in layman's terms, it's kind of like the M16 and the HK33 kind of got a little wild and crazy one night, and 9 months later the G41 came out. Well, maybe it's not that simple, but you're going to see obvious nods to those weapons. Okay, the main things that came out of the STANAG that influenced this were several points. The first one was that H&K wanted to use their tried and true roller delayed blowback operated system, fired from a closed bolt, and that they wanted to have a bolt catch, a last round bolt hold open device that did not exist on their other weapons. So that was going to have to be incorporated. It was going to need to have, as you'll see on the other side, a dust cover to prevent dirt and debris from getting inside the ejection port and influence those. And then they also wanted it to incorporate a forward assist, or a silent bolt closure device, and we'll talk about that here later as well. They wanted to have a carrying handle, so you can see it's got a spring-loaded one right there. And they wanted it to have a 3-round burst function instead of just semi-auto and full automatic, in order to provide more chances of rounds impacting and incapacitating a threat, but not lead to just mag dumping that was going to be incorporated in the weapon as well. They needed it to have a durability and robustness to exceed 20,000 rounds. They wanted the dimensions to comply with the StatAg use of rifle grenades, and we'll talk about this more, but there's a grenade ring here on the end of the barrel, as well as the compatibility with the underbarrel grenade launcher system that the U.S. had pioneered with the M203 system. We'll talk more on that as well. And then they wanted it to have a telescoping optic mount system that complied with StatAg as well. So H&K was able to redesign their original receiver mounts to actually meet the new StatAg mounts as well. Originally, the weapon was offered in 3 different variations and then 3 subsets of that. You had the G41 rifle, which you see here, which has its solid stock and a barrel that's just shorter than 18 inches in length. Then they came up with another model which was exactly the same, except it had a telescoping stock, and obviously you can trade out the stocks on either one of those. And then they came up with the G41K, K standing for Kurs, or short in German, and instead of the 17 and 0.76 inch barrel, it had a 15 inch barrel, so slightly shorter, and it was also offered with the telescoping stock. Now these were designed with 2 different barrel twists. One was 1 in 7 twist, and that was for the new SS109 5.56 by 45 cartridge that NATO adopted, and then they also had a 1 in 12 twist for those other cartridges as well. But predominantly what you saw in these ones is the 1 in 7 twist barrels. We also saw that change over in the mid to late 80s with the HK33 and HK53 weapons, that they went from went to a 1 in 7 twist barrel as well. So now let's break down the weapon and look at all of the unique features, and we'll start here at the rear with the stock. Now this one obviously has the A2 stock variation, which is their solid stock, and what we saw with the G41 was kind of an evolution from the original design. Here's an example of an MP5 A2 stock, and what you'll notice here is it's got the rear sling mount, and there's 2 holes here for push pins, and the push pins retain the stock and the trigger group and the forearm. But what's kind of odd about the original design is that on these weapons, like the MP5, there are 3 push pins, but there's only 2 holders. Well, when they went to the G41, they added a 3rd holder area. So now you can take out all 3 of the push pins, leave them in the stock so you don't lose them when you're in the field doing maintenance. Just makes a little bit more sense. The other thing you'll notice is on the original design for the A2 stocks, the stock itself fit over the back of the receiver, and the receiver kind of slid in to a recess in the back. You have an extension that fits over, and there's the push pin. When they went to the G41, they made this design flush, so it fit right up to the end of the receiver, and the push pins were actually forward of the actual stock itself. And what this allowed the weapon to do was actually move the rear sight further back to the rear, so you actually have a longer sight radius, and this also obviously helped with the StatAg welded positions for optics mounts. So that's your difference in your stocks. Well, now with the butt stock removed and the 2 push pins that hold it in place set here in the stock, we'll set that aside, and now we'll look at the trigger group. The trigger groups on the G41s are different from the other ones from the roller delayed guns. So here's an example. This one's from an MP5. You can see that there is a hole here for a front push pin that holds this trigger group in place. It's usually considered a swing down lower, where if I took the butt stock off an MP5 or HK33 or G3, the trigger group would then swing down on that push pin. But on the G41, it's held in place by the front of the receiver, and you just have to pull, and then it will come off. And what we'll notice here are the trigger groups look somewhat similar, except this one's squared off in the front, whereas the ones from all the other roller delayed guns has more of an angle, and it's got the push pin there. A lot of people think of this MP5 style pictogram burst trigger group, or the Navy trigger group, here also pictogram. They think of these as more of a mid to late 80s development specifically for the Navy SEALs. And in reality, what we now have seen, because the G41 came prior to those, is that this design, this pictogram marking in the burst trigger group specifically, came much earlier in the 80s with the G41 as well as the HK21 series machine guns. So very neat. But if we take a look at them internally, and we remove the trigger pack from the trigger housing, what we will see is that they are very similar indeed. So MP5 or any of the other roller delayed ones here in my right hand, in the left hand, here's the one from the G41. Obviously the main difference you'll see here visibly from the left side is this one has a larger ejector lever for the 5.56. This one's a 9mm. And if we flip it over to the other side, what we'll notice here is the auto trip lever is a different design here on the 9mm and the other roller delayed guns than it is here on the G41. But other than that, they are almost identical internally. One thing I will point out, which is kind of unique to this weapon, that most people either, if they've seen it, they've never noticed, or they thought they might have known what it was for. But it's a unique feature that they put onto the G41 design, and that's if you look here really closely at the trigger. You'll notice this little roll pin here and here, and it's on either side, pins through the back of the trigger there. This is actually designed for an attachment to be added to the trigger, a lever that comes down and would allow the use of the weapon with hands inside of big thick winter mittens. So if you were operating in a extreme cold weather environment and you had big mittens on, you could still fire the weapon with that. And there's a picture from their catalog that shows this. Now this option has been showcased on some of their later designs as well on the other roller delayed guns like MP5s, and they offer those to countries like Norway and Sweden, but most people would never even notice what those roll pins are for, but now you know. Okay, now let's look at the sighting options. The G41 uses a similar style fixed blade front sight under the protective hood, and the same diopter drum style sights that we saw in all the roller delayed rifles, the HK33, the G3. It's got 4 different positions. Obviously you can see here the number 4 would relate to 400 yards, 3 for 300 yards, 2 for 200, and then there's a V notch that you would set up here at the rear if you were shooting for 100 yards or in closer. And then now we can see the STANAG optic mount positions here on the receiver, which are slightly different from what we saw on all of the other roller delayed guns. And here's a picture of one of the Hensoldt optics mounted on the STANAG rails. Moving forward to that, we have the carrying handle, which is spring-loaded. It folds over the left side of the receiver, and it's at a great balance point to hold the weapon when everything's fully assembled. Spring-loaded, so it'll fall back down. On the right side, we have the forward assist or silent bolt hold open device. I'll show that to you again when we reassemble it all. And then we have the dust cover. So as soon as the charging handle goes back to the rear slightly, or the weapon is fired, it'll open up, and then obviously you can close it again when you're done firing. And then forward of that, we have the charging handle. Now the charging handle on this is a similar design as all the other rifles, but what they've actually done is they beefed up the size of it. They put the same one on there that's on the HK21 E machine guns. It's slightly longer and reinforced, and it actually pivots out like the other rifle ones do to give you a little bit more leverage as you pull it to the rear. Forward of the charging handle, we have the handguard, and you pull out the front push pin, and it will come off the receiver. And what you'll notice on this is a clear M16 influence. It's got the aluminum heat shield. It's somewhat triangular in design. It's got the drainage holes on the bottom, very reminiscent of that, and obviously unique to this specific rifle. Once we move forward of the handguard, what we'll notice here is a grenade ring that's mounted over the front of the barrel. And this is obviously not on the civilian rifle, so if you have a HK91 or 93, you won't see this grenade ring, but what this does is allows a rifle grenade to fit over the muzzle, secure itself over that ring, so that it'll stay in place when you fire it. And this one, I mounted this for the owner has the unique bayonet attachment here in the front. So what you actually do is you remove the front dust cover that's on these standard rifles, and you install this new one, and that plug right there in the center actually is where the bayonet will fit over the barrel, and then there's a mounting point that actually pushes in under spring tension and locks in place over the front of that dust cover, which is really unique. The other thing that most people don't really realize about these weapons is that they're all free-floating barrels. A lot of people think that this cocking tube here above the barrel is connected to the sight tower and that all these things are together, so they're not free-floating. But what you'll notice here, you see this maneuver, is that though it looks like they're connected, this cocking tube is actually not touching the sight tower here at the front where the dust cover is. So the barrel itself is allowed to flex separate from where the receiver is. Okay, now let's look at the markings on the receiver. On the left side here, you'll notice it says G41 for the model. There's your serial number, then caliber 5.56 by 45, the H&K emblem. You've got your eagle over N, your nitrocellulose proof mark showing that it's been tested with smokeless gunpowder, an IG date code representing 1986 production, and your Ulm proof house stamp. On the opposite side, we've got made in West Germany, H&K Chantilly, Virginia. That was the import location, the USA headquarters for H&K at the time. What you'll also notice is that the magazine well is designed specifically to operate off of M16 style magazines. And instead of a paddle mag release like we've seen on all the other roller delayed guns, this one uses a side magazine release here, just a push button and releases the magazine. Also notice here is your bolt hold open device, or your bolt catch. And if I flip this over on the other side here, let's see if I can showcase this for you. What we're looking at is this piece right here, so I'm going to come out from the other side. And right now it is in its raised position where if the bolt was traveling here, it would stop on that bolt catch. If I push down on it, now it's out of the way, the travel through the receiver is open, and that bolt group can move back and forth. But if the magazine follower on the empty magazine pushes up against spring resistance and it hits that the bottom of that tab, it will then push it up, and now it will block that forward movement of the bolt group. So that's how the bolt hold open device works. Okay, now let's look at the bolt group. The first thing we'll notice is the difference in the actual recoil rod assembly. This one is much more robust in size, and you'll also notice that this has kind of a coil braid design on the actual recoil spring, making it much stronger than what we normally see. This is a standard recoil spring from one of the roller delayed guns, and you'll notice that It's not nearly as thick in diameter, and it's just got a single coil on the spring. So much more robust here on your recoil spring. What you'll notice on the actual bolt carrier itself is that on the right side we have these notches, and this is what interfaces with the forward assist to push that back in place. Again, I'll show that to you in a moment. Very similar in operation and look to the HK33 bolt group, but this does not swap from one to the other. Now, if we take it apart, the main thing you're going to notice in difference here is in the actual bolt itself. So I don't have an HK33 bolt, but this is an MP5 bolt here in my right hand. It's very similar, except in the HK33 one obviously is larger. The main thing you're going to notice here is that this has the traditional extractor spring design that we saw on the MP5 series, the HK33 series, the G3 series. This is kind of the weak link of the entire system. It's not as strong as it needs to be. When they went to the G41 design, they changed the extractor design to the same setup that they have on the HK21 machine guns and the PSG-1 MSG-90 sniper rifles. So a much stronger extractor system that you don't have to worry about the damage and wear that you do on the other roller delayed guns. So pretty neat increase in strength on these bolt designs. Okay, now let's take a closer look at your ejection port cover and the forward assist or silent bolt closure device. See that cover? Open it. Now you're killing. Close it. Now you ain't. There you go. Obviously, the ejection port cover works as soon as you start firing. It's going to open, or if you manually operate the charger handle, it will open. As far as the purpose behind the forward assist was that if I rack the charging handle all the way forward, that's really, really loud. Obviously, it puts the bolt group fully into battery, and that's how you're supposed to operate this weapon. That's how you're supposed to operate all the roller delayed weapons. You're never supposed to ride the bolt forward or to go back and do a press check. But if for some reason you did do that and the bolt group is out of battery, as you'll see right here, now if I don't want to rack this charger handle all the way and let it go forward and be really loud, I can actually press on the forward assist and that will close it. Now that was still loud, but it's not nearly as loud as racking the whole thing. And then the last thing I'll cover here, obviously you see the hand guard. This was what came standard on them, but what was also incorporated into these weapons was what was called the tactical group support. As you'll see here in this brochure I have for it, the G41 TGS, or tactical group support, was an underbarrel grenade launcher in 40 millimeter, similar to the design of the M203. And it pivoted down from the front, opened kind of like a over-under shotgun, and you'd load the grenade in and fire under the barrel. So we saw those on this weapon. It was also offered as a fit for the G3 and for the HK33, but this was one of those export models. Now these rifles did not have massive success for H&K. NATO never adopted a rifle per se, and there were no major countries that picked this up as their new battle rifle. They did have some success in smaller orders. There were some countries like Malaysia and I believe Latvia, Italy ordered a few, but it was just never the great success that they had hoped it would be. But at that point, they'd already moved on to the G11 design, which was going to be the successor for all of these as a new infantry weapon. But they took a lot of the lessons that they learned out of this one and progressed those on to future designs as well. So really very unique weapon, very cool to have here and a showcase for you guys as well. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. As always, I'm humbled to share my knowledge and experience with you. If you're looking for H&K service and support, or unique training opportunities, give me a shout. That's what I'm here for. Thanks, guys.